forever. It's pretty much the basis of the second law of thermodynamics. That flies in the face of the theory that this universe has always been here. Okay? Remember we talked about, when we first talked about the existence of God, how we can know logically that there is a God or a creator of some kind before we even talked about who that God was. We talked about how we can know there was a creator. Because there's only three options to how this universe got here. We agreed that this universe is here, right? We still agree on that, right? This universe is present. We are here. Okay? There are only three options, no matter what theory is created. It falls into one of these three. Either it was created by something outside of this physical universe, something that it would be supernatural, beyond the natural. It created itself from nothing, or it's always been here. We just talked about how it can't always be here. The second law of thermodynamics shows that it can't be. Now you can believe in that. People believe in that all the time. That's your choice. That's on you to believe in that. But to call that science is a different standard. That's a different thing altogether. Because for it to be science, it has to be observable and testable, and it is not scientific. It needs to be stopped from being taught in the textbooks. And we also looked at how it can't have created itself because we have no evidence whatsoever of something being created from nothing by itself. Something cannot just create itself from nothing. That only leaves one option. Before we even talked about what God that was, who that was, or the Bible or any of that, we can know logically there is a creator. And then we looked at how we can know the Bible is from that creator by certain things in the Bible that have to be supernatural. We looked at certain laws of science, certain scientific principles, certain historical principles, certain historical facts, certain prophetic facts throughout the Bible that could not have been created by any mere man. So that points to this creator giving us this. And then we looked at, since we could prove this is true, what this says about said creator. What does this say about said creator in relation to how life began? Did it begin 3 billion something years ago in a pool of water that encompassed the earth? A lot of people believe in that. A lot of people believe in that. Like, I don't know if you realize how many people believe in that. A lot of people, that is the number one growing religion today, evolutionism. A lot of people believe in it without one single shred of scientific evidence for it. Now, if it was just thought of in the world today among people of the world as just another religion, it would not be given the credence that it is in the classroom, in the universities, in society, to the youngest kids for when they can begin to read. It would not be given that if it was just thought of as the religion it is. But it's taught as science. And it's taught as science because it is the number one religion, the number one religion that is in every way opposite of Christianity. You ever thought about that? It is the only religion in the entire world, and there are thousands of religions in the world, that is in every single way opposite of Christianity. No other religion is like that. Now, there are many religions that, in fact, every other religion that is different than Christianity. But this is the only one that is opposite of Christianity in every way. That's why it's the devil at work. That's why it exists. It's the devil at work. And it's taught as science when nothing scientific points to it. Now I'll say, look at the fossils, okay? You ever heard that argument before? Look at the fossil record. Look, I don't know if you've ever talked to many evolutionists, but look at the fossil record. The geological time scale that we read about in textbooks that has these supposed layers of millennia and even millions of years. These different periods. You might have heard terms like the Triassic period, the Jurassic period, the Cretaceous period. Supposedly found in these layers of sediment. You've ever seen that in a textbook or something? It's like a chunk of the ground they cut out, and it's all these layers, one on top of the other. They're supposed to go back billions of years. You ever seen that? Raise your hand if you've ever seen that before. You know the only place on the entire earth you can find that is? In the textbook. There's no place on earth that has ever been discovered that you could find those layers like that, successively like that. No place. The only place you ever find that is in the textbook being taught by people who believe in it. Only place. So first off, the fossil record thing doesn't work too well because their whole basis of saying just look at the rocks, the fossils date the rocks, and the rocks, they date the fossils. That's circular reasoning. Evolutionists admit that that's circular reasoning. But they hold on to it because it's not requiring a God. It's not requiring some kind of authority over their lives. They'll say, look at the fossils. We can see how they have changed over time through these layers, except most of the fossils we find seem like they go backwards. And anything that looks like it might be interpreted as some kind of progressive evolution, you keep looking into the layers, the highest one, the next one, which is supposed to be the newest one, the youngest one, the more evolved one, millions of years later, actually looks like it goes backwards a step. No, really, what it looks like in these layers are animals that were buried under sediment in a very rapid progression, very quickly buried into this dirt from some kind of catastrophe. What could that catastrophe be? The flood. That's what we say. That's what we say. It's the flood of Noah's day. Okay? That's what we claim. Granted, that is not scientific. That is not a scientific claim. We weren't there in Noah's day. If we're going to be consistent and keep with this definition of science, we did not observe it. Okay? We cannot experiment with it. It's not scientific. It's not a scientific claim. But we do know and can know, and we already have proved who was there, who did tell us. The very concept that the Bible is infallible, and we proved that, and how it is from a God who we proved exists, points to everything that Bible says being true. Even if it's hard for us to believe because of all this scientific, pseudoscience rhetoric that we hear all the time. Fossils do not even come close to proving evolution. You know the only thing you can actually learn from a fossil? You know the only thing a fossil tells you? Something died. That's the only thing a fossil tells you. You don't know how old the creature lived. You don't know if the creature had any offspring. All you can really know is that it died. Did you know we found dinosaur fossils with flexible cartilage still? How many millions of years do evolutionists say dinosaurs died out? 65 million years ago? We have found dinosaur bones with flexible cartilage in them. That doesn't work if it's 65 million years old. You know what the evolutionists say about that? Instead of actually trying to rethink their theory, instead of actually trying to sit down and actually think about what they've thought was true their entire life, what they say is, wow, it's amazing that something that's 65 to 70 million years old could still have flexible cartilage in it. That's all they say. They're like, that's just amazing. And that's all they say about it. They don't try to give any kind of credence to anything that creationists are saying, which, by the way, is unscientific. Science, since it's about observation and experiment, also requires finding out all pieces of evidence you can. Logic dictates that. Rationality dictates that. We have to understand every piece of evidence presented to us. It has to be given to us. And if you just say no to that and do not want to consider it, you're not being very scientific anyway. That's just the way it is. Fossils don't prove evolution. The very fact that life can't begin without life, and that nothing or something never comes from nothing by itself, prove evolution is not true. Why is that? We already looked at how life couldn't have began from nothing. But sometimes you have people called theistic evolutionists, who are people who claim to be Christians who are also evolutionists. We've already looked at how evolution and creation are opposites. You can't put them together at all. They don't work together. So people who claim to be Christians and claim to be evolutionists at the same time, they'll say, okay, so we believe God created this, but he did it through evolution. That's what they say. God created this. He created life. He started it, but he let it evolve over time in a macro sense. He let it evolve over time. That's what they'll say. The law of biogenesis, and also the idea that something can never come from nothing, also flies in the face of this. If you have something that is evolving from a fish to an amphibian, to a reptile, to a bird, to a mammal, there's some changes that have to happen, okay? Some changes that have to happen in the DNA, okay? Who has ever heard of a mutation? Mutation? A mutation is a change within the DNA of a certain type of animal. That's the basic definition of a mutation, okay? Over 90% of the time, mutations are harmful. They do not benefit the creature whatsoever, which goes against what evolutionists teach. They believe it's through these mutations that they have been able to evolve. 90% of the time, or higher, they're not beneficial. They're harmful. You can mutate a fly, and they have hundreds of times. A fruit fly, hundreds of times. You might get 4 wings. You might get 2 heads. You might get 2 legs. You might get all sorts of different things from this fly. And this fly might even be benefited from the things it gets. We'll even give them that. You know what that creature still is? A fly. No matter how many times you mutate it, it's still a fly. Okay? Mutations are the scrambling of existing evidence or existing DNA, not the addition of new DNA. Survival of the fittest does not explain arrival of the fittest. It may explain why things can last, why things survive over other creatures, but not how they began, not how they arrived. Mutations do not prove evolution. Mutations are just the scrambling of existing DNA within the creature. We see it had 2 wings before, but then it was mutated and had 4 wings, so now it must be evolved. It's still a fly. It already had the DNA, the information to create wings. You just scrambled it through the mutation to give it 4 wings instead of 2 wings, which that proved to be harmful for the fruit fly. But something else that has to happen for something to go from a fish to an amphibian to a reptile to a bird to a mammal is information has to be added. Raise your hand if you've ever seen a bird. I'm being serious. Raise your hand if you've ever seen a bird. Raise your hand if you've ever seen a dog. How many differences are there from a bird to a dog? More than one, right? There's more than one difference. Now, I'm not saying they believe birds go to dogs immediately, but the fact is they believe that birds eventually evolved into mammals. How much new information into the DNA, into the genetic code has to be added for that change to occur? Thousands to millions of new information has to be added. The gene code has to add information, not scramble existing information. That's how microevolution works. That's how we have variations of different species within a specific kind. How you can have different breeds of dogs. Is the DNA, the genetic code, is scrambled, but it's already there to be scrambled. But to be able to go from a bird to a mammal, there has to be new DNA added to that, okay? Where does that come from? There's no answer given to that. No answer given to that. They accept it because they refuse to accept God. I want you to know that that is the entire mindset, even from somebody who is a sincere evolutionist, somebody who is not exactly against people being Christians, but also is not a Christian. He doesn't have a personal vendetta against Christians, but he's also not someone who looks at religion with any kind of respect, even though he staunchly believes that evolution is science when it is, in fact, a religion. Even the most sincere of those people get this wrong. They cannot provide an answer for it, and they accept it by blind faith. Now, we accept God, that the Bible is from God, that Jesus is the Son of God, the plan of salvation through Christ, and how to live faithfully as a Christian by faith. In fact, without faith, Hebrews 11:6 says we cannot please God. But there's a difference. There's a difference in our belief and their belief. There's a difference there. Our belief requires evidence, Hebrews 11:1. We are never commanded to believe something without first examining the evidence for it. In fact, to believe something without having evidence for it is the very definition of blind faith. And we've talked about before how even God falls into that category. We have to examine the evidence for there being a God. And God has left ample evidence for that. And that's how our faith comes about. Of course, faith has an element that we can't actually see, or it wouldn't be faith. We can't actually see it. We have to believe it, but we believe it based on what evidence is left behind for us to take part in. Evolutionists think they do have evidence. But we spent this entire time talking about how their strongest arguments actually go against what they say is evidence. And when it comes down to them just accepting it for the sole fact that they don't want to accept a God, that's blind faith. That is the very opposite of science. Blind faith. They don't believe in a God, but they do believe in their theory that science itself refutes. And I think, in fact, that science itself points to a God. Now, that is different than saying science proves God. I do not believe science proves God in the traditional sense of the definition of science. Science, by definition, requires observation and experiment. We today do not have the luxury of being able to observe God and experiment on God in the most strict sense, okay? But it does point to and give evidence for God because God is the one who created science. Of course, it would leave evidence behind. It only makes sense for that to happen. The very law of biogenesis, the second law of thermodynamics, the law of gravity, the law of inertia, all of these things point to a lawgiver. There is no reason that from a chaotic explosion that had no purpose in exploding, that we have all this order that exists today. And not just a little bit of order. Every single system in the universe has order behind it, has order prescribed to it. It runs on a circuit. It runs according to its own course and really does not deviate. Human beings are the only creatures in all of God's creation that deviate from their prescribed course. That should make you think, why do we do that? Why are we the only ones that deviate? Of course, we have the freedom of choice to do that. But it should make you feel ashamed each time you sin, because it makes you deviate from God's course. And it doesn't help your cause in proclaiming a creator. Why is this study necessary as we close? We wrap up. Before we talk about the fruits of evolution, the fruits of atheism, the evils that evolutionism and atheism have done to this world next week, let's talk about and wrap up again why this study was ever necessary. I have 3 goals in anything I ever teach you. Anything I ever preach to you, I have 3 goals. If you're a faithful Christian, I want to encourage you to keep going. If you are lost, I'm trying to get you saved. I'm trying to make you a faithful Christian, or a Christian in general at first, and then a faithful Christian. I'm trying to get you saved. I'll let you know I'm after you. And if you're a Christian who is not being faithful, I want to make you feel very uncomfortable. So a Christian who's not doing anything for the Lord, I want to make you feel very uncomfortable. We, as I've talked about last week, we as Christians fall down on the job all the time when we are the only ones that can know absolute truth. You might have never thought of that before. We are the only ones that can know absolute truth. It is up to us to not just learn the evidence, to know the evidence for our own faith, but to apply the evidence and teach the evidence so others may know the very God that created them and loved them enough to die for them. Thank you.